guys, welcome back to my channel, Ticcing Together. As always, the goal of this channel is to provide education about and to raise awareness as to what it's like living with Tourette Syndrome. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the waxing and waning periods that people with Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders experience when dealing with tics. So it's going to be fairly brief and self-explanatory, but for those of you out there who may have been recently diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome or have just been experiencing tics recently, I thought this would be a very good way to explain the life cycle of tics to you. So people with Tourette Syndrome have to have at least 2 motor tics and 1 vocal tic for a period of a year, or at least a year, until you can be diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome. And people with tic disorders can either have motor tics or vocal tics or both. There are a ton of different types of tic disorders and every person with tics is valid, but there is also a life cycle of tics that I wanted to talk about. So there is a waxing period and there is a waning period. People with Tourette Syndrome know that, that tics are not constant. They don't last all the time. We'll have tics sometimes, we won't have tics sometimes. Sometimes tics will be a lot worse than other times, and it really is a cycle. There's ups and downs, there's peaks and valleys, there's so many different types of tic varieties and timings that people have tics. So, waxing and waning. This goes for other phenomena, not just Tourette Syndrome and tics, so you're probably familiar with the terms waxing and waning. But in comparison to Tourette Syndrome, waxing means that you're going through a period of more intense tics. And although tics are pretty much always in the back of our minds, like they're always going to be there, when you're having a waxing period, your tics are more frequent, more prevalent, and more intense. And depending on the individual, this waxing period where you're having a really high amount of tics can last days, weeks, months, or even years. But everyone with Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders will experience a waxing and waning course of tics. And that is the life cycle of tics. It's always going to be up and down. I just pulled a muscle in my neck from my tic. It really hurts. But, waxing periods result in more intensity of tics, more frequency of tics, and just more tics in general. And like I said, they can happen for different periods of time for different people. And the waning period is very similar in the way that the waxing period can last different amounts of times and it can be different for each individual. But the waning period means that tics are less frequent, they're less intense, and they're just less. And so in the life cycle of tics, having less tics for a period of time would be considered the waning phase. But these phases coexist, and so waxing and waning, they will first increase, then decrease, and it really varies between individual to individual. However, they will always happen with tics. You're either going to be having a good tic day or a good tic period, or a bad tic day or a bad tic period. Really, tics do vary, and it is all individually based. Typically in the waxing phase, you can also develop new tics, which is super frustrating. But when you're having an increased number of tics and an increased frequency, you're also going to have more tics develop, because this time period your brain is kind of just having more incorrect firing of these neurotransmitters and you can develop new tics. Waxing and waning periods can also be influenced by environmental factors. So say you're super stressed or you're having like a big thing in your life happening, that could lead to a waxing period. But say you're having a less intense life moment, you may be in a waning period. So that just means that environmental factors can influence the waxing and waning period of tics. Tics are often temporarily suppressible, as I've mentioned in previous videos, but during waxing periods, it's harder to suppress because the tics are just more frequent, as I said, more prevalent, more intense. It's just more when you're in a waxing period. When you're in a waning period, however, it is easier to suppress because you're having less frequent tics, less intense tics, and you're able to kind of just go maybe minutes or even hours at a time without ticking. So that's really great. When you're in a waning period, you definitely have to cherish it, because when I'm in a waning period, like, I get so happy. Like, it is a beautiful thing. In life too, there is a waxing and waning period of tics that has been kind of studied by doctors, but not really. Some people say that when you're younger, you often have a lot more waxing periods than when you're older. And when you're older and you're in adulthood, you often are in more of a waning period. So I'm not too sure about that. I'm 22 and I still have a lot of waxing periods. So I don't know the validity of that argument, but yeah. Throughout lifetime, tics will go up and down, but Tourette syndrome is a lifelong condition and you're always going to experience tics. However, you may be in a waning period in your adulthood years, meaning that you'll have less tics, but they still will be there and you still will have Tourette syndrome. It is super normal for tics to wax and wane, and I just hope you guys know that, because if you're having a really high intensity tic time, just know that it will lessen and you will have a waning period. It just depends on when, and there is no telling of when really. It'll just happen. Sometimes you'll be really ticky, sometimes you'll be less ticky, but it really depends, because tics are a real legit life cycle. Like, they cycle and they change for everyone, but just know that tics will wax and wane for you, and it really is unique to the individual. But it can be influenced by environmental factors. When you're in a waxing phase, your tics are going to be stronger, they're going to be more intense. As I said, they're going to be more relevant and prevalent, so they're just going to be there more. And when you're in a waning phase, they're going to be less strong, less frequent, and you can probably suppress a little bit better. So as I said, when you're in a waning phase, enjoy that, because it doesn't last forever. You will go back to a waxing phase and vice versa. So I hope this gave you a little bit of insight on waxing and waning phases in the tic cycle of Tourette syndrome. If you did learn anything, I would be so appreciative if you would subscribe to my channel, because the goal of this channel here is to break the stigma surrounding Tourette syndrome and to let you guys know the real and raw truth about it. By subscribing to my channel, you'll stay tuned to educational content as well as my life stories with Tourette syndrome, and I just really want to educate you all, because Tourette's is really misunderstood, and we gotta like get the word out there that it is something that people deal with, and it is hard to deal with, but it isn't the worst thing ever, and I just want to get awareness out there. I would also appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below saying hi, telling me what you want to see in future videos, or letting me know if you are currently in a waxing or waning period. I'm pretty sure I'm in a waning, I don't actually know, because like I think currently waning period, but like yesterday I was in a waxing period, so it really depends. It can vary from day to day, so let me know. As always, we're learning together, we're laughing together, and we're ticking together. Have a great night.